Great. All right, so hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. Really excited to get started. First of all, you are in the right place. You decided to come in and hear from our amazing speakers tonight. Seth Levine is here and his co-author Elizabeth McBride, and they're going to be talking about their new book called The New Builders. We're also going to be joined by Chris Awatri and Marcus Anderson, and so we're really excited about kind of the diversity of thought leadership, and everything that we're kind of bringing together. I think it's a timely conversation. It's an important conversation. And obviously, I'm super excited that you came to join us. So to get things started, this is really important for our speakers because they want to know who the audience is. So we're going to go ahead and put up a poll. You want to go ahead and do that? And so everyone should be able to see this poll here. Now, you're allowed to choose more than one, of course. Maybe two. How do you self-describe yourself, and maybe even more importantly, what do you want to be described as, or what is your hidden powers? Go ahead and do that. Looks like we've got about 20-30% of the folks in. About 45% in. So give it just another minute. Great, 72%. All right, excellent. Let's go ahead and share those. So just so everybody knows, we've got a diverse group here. Everything from artists to entrepreneurs to innovators and funders, scientists. And so what I really want everyone to realize is that, let's stop sharing that now, that we've got a really diverse group. And that's really important for us because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to cross those conversations and those barriers between lots of different silos. Why are we doing this? Why do we throw these things on every month and we're trying to look for amazing content and amazing humans? Is because our purpose here at Black Lab is to propel humanity forward. And that means to inspire, to activate and hyper enable you to help design and build a beautiful future. We think it's super important and we're excited you're along for the ride. Now, if you're new to this, welcome. We've got a lot of veterans I see already on the forum tonight. This is very interactive. So a couple of things to know about interactive Zoom. First of all, it's always appropriate to mute yourself, which is at the bottom left-hand side of your screen when you're not speaking. And then we call on you or you get called on, or you can even unmute in this kind of setting and chime in. But right now, if you're unmuted, go ahead and mute yourself. The second thing is that when I'm showing, or if I'm not showing screen right now, for example, if I stop the share, a really good view would be the gallery view. And you can do that by your top right-hand side of the view. You can go between speaker view and the gallery view. And the gallery view allows us to see as many people as possible. The last thing is I'm going to be using something called breakouts. And that means what we're going to do is Zoom has this magic where I can literally take a bunch of you and put you in a very small room so you can have a very intimate conversation. And so this forum is very interactive. And then when we break you out into those small groups, we bring you back into the large group, and then we can share in with the entire group. So it's a pretty effective way of getting a lot of really interesting ideas across in a very intimate way. So be prepared for that in a few minutes. We'll be doing our first one. A point on, people always ask, why are we doing this? Like, what am I supposed to get out of it? And the whole point is to build meaningful relationships and meaningful work. So if you're an entrepreneur, this is an opportunity to meet other entrepreneurs or other technologists, or maybe scientists or funders. We've actually had multiple now entrepreneurs actually meet investors and a week later get funding for their startups. The same thing goes from, whether it's scientists or journalists or artists. This whole thing is about collaboration. So I really encourage you to take advantage of these 2 hours and go all in about meeting somebody new, be vulnerable, share, give, and see what comes out of it. All right, so last month, if you missed it, you missed an amazing session. You can go back to our blog at blacklabsports.com, and you can watch the interaction between Lori and Charlie and some of the other participants there about basically the future of pain, and specifically some of the findings, the scientific findings around back pain and chronic pain, and how it's really associated with the brain, not necessarily physiologically. So I'm not going to say any more about that. Amazing stuff coming out from a scientific perspective. A little bit mind-blowing. I actually experimented with myself on a couple of things, and it's really phenomenal. So definitely take a look at that. Just a real quick, I want to introduce my co-host here, Cody Burkhart. Cody is kind enough to jump in, massive brain, very curious human, and works at NASA, but really he's a good friend. He's a nerd like I am, father, husband. And so he helps me really run this. So I just want to make sure, put shout out for him. And also, listen, there's a lot of people here. And if you have any questions, the person to really reach out to is Emily. So Emily, yeah, she's our GM here at Black Lab. And a lot of times what's going to happen is you might meet somebody, but you didn't get a chance to get their contact information, or you want to see the recording of the video tonight, just reach out to her. It's emily@blacklabsports.com. She's willing to help at all. And of course, the last thing in Zoom, there's the chat. So on the bottom of your screen, you can chat. You can direct chat to any of us, or you can chat to the whole group. It's a great function to have kind of sidebar conversations while things are growing. So here we go. We're going to do our very first breakout. And before you do, Emily, are you getting ready for that? She's getting ready. So she's the control behind the curtain. So here's what we're going to do. Everyone gets 1 minute. We're going to break you into teams of about 3 or 4 people. And so everyone has 1 minute. So for the people here are veterans, help monitor and guide this. But you're going to get 1 minute to go in and introduce yourself, a very quick introduction, give everyone in the room a minute to share. So make sure that one person doesn't capitalize the whole 3 or 4 minutes. Again, if you miss some contact information, don't worry, we'll get you back on. But definitely take this opportunity to meet somebody new. And then what we'll do is we're going to pull you back. We're going to whisk you back in about 3 minutes. Are you ready? All right, let's do it. We'll see you back here in just a few minutes. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you guys were able to meet somebody new. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. I know that feels a little bit like, and go ahead and you guys can mute yourselves again as you're coming in. Feels a little bit like Star Trek, going out and then coming back in. Hopefully everyone got to meet someone new. Yeah? Awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and start sharing the screen again. So again, I'm really excited about tonight's speakers. Elizabeth McBride, a writer, a traveler, a journalist, and with her co-author, Seth Levine's here. Again, amazing VC here in Colorado. And so it's going to be really interesting, I think, to have this conversation with these authors, especially with the new builders and the topics that they've uncovered and decided to write upon. And then we're joined by Chris Awatri and Marcus Anderson as well, and to be able to hear some of their stories and where they are in their journey, their careers and their startups. So
JP,
really,
one of the things to add here,
yeah.
I get an opportunity, each of you get into your breakout rooms, I get an opportunity to kind of sit down with these folks as they kind of work through and talk about this. And I'm just really impressed by the backgrounds. It's a nice conversation of really cool ideas and really cool people who are thinking much broader than just about the topics at hand, right? How we connect ourselves into humanity. And I just think this is going to be a really exciting conversation. So truly stoked that they came on today, and thanks for letting me share in this experience.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. Awesome. So we're going to start it off with a question. It's another poll. And the question is this. So over the past 10 years, if you think about all of the companies that were created, and we're talking about enterprises and companies, startups, there were about 2 million of these new businesses started. So out of those 2 million, what percentage are minority owned? Go ahead and throw that poll up there for me. Let's make a guess here. Was it less than 15%, 15 to 25%, 25 to 50, or over 50%? And if you don't click, I don't know. That's not an okay answer. You have to make a guess. Awesome. We're at 81%. Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here, and we'll share results. So not surprising, actually, when I first heard this, I was thinking the same thing. Probably about 10% was kind of in my mind. Would it be surprising to you to find out that over 50% of those 2 million companies are minority owned? Right. So that's so even just our perception coming in is, and we're going to talk about that today, but it's different. So the following question is, and I'm going to let this sit into you because I'll let Seth talk about it a little bit later. But the question is then, out of all those companies, how many are institutionally backed, right? If it's 50% that are minority owned, how many what's the percentage that are institutionally backed? And so it's just a question to start thinking about, and we'll let that have that conversation a little bit later. So with that, I'm going to welcome Seth to the stage and have him just introduce himself. Seth, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to be on the show with you tonight, and just have you maybe introduce yourself and tell us why you wrote this book and what to expect.
Thanks, JP. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. Yeah, it's awesome to be here, JP. JP and I have known each other for 20 years now, something like that.
Right.
I mean, it's just been it's been amazing to watch how Boulder has grown, how each of us has grown. Totally different jobs now. I think JP was an investment banker when I met him, and I was I don't know, an analyst or something. It was not a pretty sight. Uh-oh. If you can go on mute there so we don't get that feedback. So let me just really quickly introduce myself, because I actually would like to get to the meat of the presentation. And one of the things that we've tried to do, we've done a few of these events around the book, but really we try to have events be about the new builders and less about the book. Obviously, we hope that people are intrigued by some of the things we talk about and will go buy the book and learn about it. It releases, the book is going to be released in just under a week. It's next Tuesday. But Elizabeth and I wrote the book because both of us sort of come from the world of venture. I'm a venture capitalist, she's a business journalist. And we were just concerned about the extent to which venture has, and tech entrepreneurship specifically, has sort of eaten up our view of entrepreneurship. And I think if there's 4 or 5 key takeaways from the book, the first, a number of them are kind of surprising, and JP kind of referenced one of them, which is just the percentage of businesses that are started by people that are Black and brown. But even before that, the entrepreneurship in the United States is actually in a state of decline, a rapid state of decline. And it should be alarming for anyone actually paying attention. Part of the reason that it's declining is because technology businesses have just overtaken our view of entrepreneurship. And so when people think about an entrepreneur these days, they think about a technology entrepreneur. That is not the history of the United States. We talk a lot about this in the book, but there's a long history in the U.S. of entrepreneurship. Our country was founded by entrepreneurs, and for a very long time, being a small shop owner or being a Main Street business owner was considered both a path to success and to prosperity and to community leadership, but also that was entrepreneurship. More recently, Silicon Valley's kind of taken over that view. Related to that is we have this overweening love affair with companies that are scaling, that grow really big. We call them unicorns in our world. And we think that's really dangerous to sort of entrepreneurship writ large, because the reality is that most businesses don't start, nor should they start, to grow into these massive companies. And by the way, venture is a terrible model for actually creating broad-based economic development. We do an okay job, and I think that's even debatable, of funding some number of businesses that grow incredibly large. Most of the businesses that get funded by venture capitalists fail. 66% of deals that venture capitalists fund fail to return capital. 75% of venture firms, according to the Kaufman Foundation, don't return the capital that was invested in them. So it's debatable whether it's a good model, but what we talk about is the need not to create unicorns, these sort of mythical or semi-mythical, since we put the label on companies, that are incredibly rare and celebrated, but are 1 in a million or 1 in tens of thousands. We really need to create camels, much more hardy. They actually exist, and they can be the workhorses of our economy. JP touched on this, but the third takeaway of the book is that the people that are starting businesses today are much more likely to be Black, brown, and female. And we don't recognize that, again, in part because Silicon Valley and the white male hoodie wearing tech founder has kind of taken over our view of what an entrepreneur is. And then lastly, and this was something that I think is really important, but that we sort of weave throughout the book, is this notion of like community and place. And what we found is new builders is the term that we came up with to describe this next generation of entrepreneur, these people that are more likely to be Black, brown, and female, more likely to be building a business that is not a technology business in and of itself, even if it does rely on technology, although they might be building a technology business. Plenty of new builders do build technology businesses. But is this connection that new builders have to place and to community, right? And this is an example of that. But we talk about it in the book, meaning a little bit more physically related to community and just sort of the fabric of Main Street. And what we found over and over and over again were these incredible people working in communities across the United States that had this deep connection to the community that they were working in. And so in the book, we sort of mix, it's like part research and statistics and part storytelling, and we tell the stories of a lot of these new builders, and then we try to frame that in the context of what's actually happening, using the either government or other research statistics to describe what's going on in the United States. So I'll leave it there, but I want to leave you with one thought, which is that, or one stat, which most people also find very surprising. The percentage of businesses that take money from institutional capital is 1%. The percentage of businesses that take money from banks is 17%. This is, I'm quoting Kauffman Foundation data. That leaves 82% of firms that never take any form of institutionalized capital. We talk a lot about capital access because capital matters, and capital is what enables entrepreneurships and enables entrepreneurs to be successful. And we talk in the book about why it matters that only 1% of businesses take venture, and yet that seems to be the only model we ever talk about. And I'm partially responsible, I suppose, for that because I'm in the middle of that industry. And it's not that venture is bad or that we should stop, funding businesses that way, but we really need to figure out a way to get more money to this middle 82%, and really also to expand the percentage of companies that take money from banks. But when you think about who's starting businesses and you think about having to self-fund those businesses, and then you realize that after 400 years of systemic racism in our country, the average Black family has 1/10 the wealth of the average white family. That's true across every income level. Doesn't matter what you make if you're a head of household. It also is true across every educational level. It's similarly true, slightly less dramatic for people from Hispanic or Latin backgrounds. The ratio is about 1 to 7. So we're leaving these people on their own to fund their businesses. We've destroyed the social safety net, large part in our country, and yet we have most of the entrepreneurial activity in our world coming from these people that are incredibly scrappy and incredibly gritty. The fact that they're being successful despite everything I just described should suggest that if we just added a little more capital, a little more help, a little more know-how, a little more mentorship in the way that Silicon Valley has just absolutely perfected, how much more economic development we could have. The vast majority of job creation in the United States comes from new businesses. And yet you'll see some trends later that suggest that this is really in trouble.
Seth, talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about your personal, like why this is so important to you, and maybe a little bit about you personally.
Yeah, Elizabeth and I met. She was I wasn't physically in Palestine at the time, but I was working on something Palestinian related. She was in Jerusalem, and we started talking about these just interesting businesses that were kind of outside the mold, most of whom were international. And then at one point she was in Boulder and we were sitting in my office and we were talking about the fact that there are all these interesting companies in the US as well, whose stories just aren't being told. And so, I think that's how we came to this project. The reason I'm interested in it is because I guess I've always had this interest in, sort of different types of businesses and different types of founders. And I've been incredibly frustrated sitting in venture, which has done a very, 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 very poor job, my firm included, in funding businesses started by Black, brown, and female people. And it's important to me. I have a lot of friends of color. I have children who are Black, so it's highly personal to me why these trends need to be fixed. And I can see a sort of a more prosperous economy for all of us if we can sort of get out of our own way and start to look beyond just what's right in front of us. And I think in particular, I've been alarmed over the last 4 or 5 years as it just seems like the sort of crush it, killing it, this unicorn, this valuation stuff has just sort of taken over. And it's, I mean, I get it in my day job, and we don't talk a lot about the unicorn companies that Foundry is backed, but we've backed a bunch of them, and that's how we made money, and that's how I personally made money, right? I mean, it did well by me, but and Foundry as a fund was really successful, and our investors made money as well. And that's good, because our investors include teachers unions and things like that. But that's not a way to really spread wealth in our society. And I've become really concerned about sort of the ways in which we think about wealth and wealth creation and allow for wealth creation. It just hasn't spread to a wide enough sector of our economy, and that's what's really starting to harm our entrepreneurial dynamism.
Thanks, Ed. So let's do this. Let me go ahead and share these couple of slides, because we did put together a couple of slides on the situation. You mentioned some of them, but maybe just walk us through these. And then I know Elizabeth's gonna be joining us. She's on a radio interview, I think. You guys are tag teaming all of your book tour stuff, but let's jump into some of these. Let's walk through these a little bit, and then we'll pull in some of the other conversations. So do you want us to walk through these couple of slides?
Yeah, so let's talk about this. This slide sort of encapsulates some of the key trends that I discussed in the sort of little overview I gave. But in the top left, you can see this is this question of is entrepreneurship dying in the U.S., right? The firm entry rate, those are new firms being created. The exit rate are companies die. We're going to talk about failure a little bit later. These are not failed businesses, right? Many of them operated for a number of years and then ended up shutting down for whatever reason. But if you look back, to sort of the beginning of the graph, there was a really big gap, and the gap of this sort of cream colored line over the red colored line, that's just the net new businesses that are being created. And you can see that trend is reversed. And in particular, the Great Recession caused the trend to significantly reverse. Below that, you can see the results of what we're seeing above, which is that the average age of a firm in the United States is just getting older. There's just more older firms because fewer new firms are being created. The problem with that is the upper right slide, which is I alluded to, which is this is job creation and job destruction, meaning people losing their jobs when firms go out of business or firms shrink. And you can see that essentially all net new job creation comes from businesses that are just started. That doesn't mean older businesses don't hire new people, but on an aggregate basis, all of the job creation in the United States comes from new business. And then lastly is what we described in terms of the overall trends. In particular, Black women are starting businesses at an exceptionally high rate, and women make up almost half of all business owners now. They will probably they're starting businesses at a greater rate than men are. So at some point in the next handful of years, they'll surpass men in terms of the total business ownership. These are really important trends to recognize, because we haven't set up our systems of finance and our systems of support to deal with any of this. And really, we talk about this a lot in the book, but for the first time ever, the systems of finance are completely different. They look different. The people that control those systems look totally different than the people that are starting businesses. Now, that might be okay if we did a better job of funneling money to these new builders, but we're not doing that. I love this slide. It really concerns me, especially as someone who spends a lot of time in Silicon Valley, just how much the definition of entrepreneur has been taken over by by this stereotype white male hoodie wearing founder. And we've got we didn't put them up on the slides, but there's some quotes from some relatively famous, actually very famous venture capitalists that talk about, if you're over 32, then I'm not interested in seeing your business. Or when the kid, the Stanford dropout, walks in and he's wearing his hoodie, and I know I'm onto something. And that's how this world thinks, which I think is really detrimental to overall sort of egalitarianism of finance and our ability to actually fund people that are starting businesses. It also tends to skew to the coasts, right? So we think about Silicon Valley, obviously the West Coast, East Coast. Boulder is considered an entrepreneurial hub, and there's a handful of other entrepreneurial hubs. But this notion of kind of rise of the rest, which is just starting to really take hold. There's lots of great entrepreneurs that are working in markets all over the country. Yesterday, we did an Instagram takeover in Oklahoma City, and we spent a bunch of time on Instagram talking about a project that we outlined in the book, or that we covered in the book, on the east side of Oklahoma City, which by the way had been formerly redlined, meaning banks would, for racist reasons, wouldn't lend, even though that's totally legal. Totally redlined district in Oklahoma City. And we talked about this new development called East Point, which has spurred a whole bunch of economic development in this area that had been essentially left behind because no one was willing to invest in it. This is a funny slide, JP. I like this, or Emily, really, she put it together. The quest for unicorn. We should have just put a camel next to it, but I really like that. Yeah, I borrowed that. There's an entrepreneur who started a new form of college called he's out of South Africa. It's the African Educational Foundation, named Fred Swaniker, and he talks about camels and the need to create this army of sustainable, hardy businesses that may be a little less sexy than the mythical unicorn, but overall will lift up economies in a better way.
So Seth, I'm going to let you take a breather right there. Elizabeth joined us. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I'm going to put up your slide real quick. Welcome. Thank you for jumping on. How was the radio interview?
It was really fun. And he said, the interviewer, Ryan, said to apologize. We went a little over. I tend to get very passionate about these issues.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you this. Would you mind introducing yourself a little bit, and then maybe tell us why, Seth already kind of gave his background and what was really passionate and personal about this this endeavor, and maybe you could do the same thing, and then we can pull in the team.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So like what's not on that slide, I guess, is the backstory, or the real story maybe, which is that I'm kind of the original like scrappy entrepreneur myself. In that I got a divorce 7 years ago and had to really rapidly invent or reinvent a business journalism career that would support my 2 kids. And in doing that, I traveled around the world and in the middle of the US telling stories of overlooked founders, and found a lot of people that were a lot like me, and founded Times of Entrepreneurship 2 years ago to tell those stories of entrepreneurs who tend to be overlooked. And about the same time, I had run into Seth reporting internationally I was working for the United Nations at the time, and dropped in to see Seth. And that's when who has, I don't know if he said this, but has kind of a passion for supporting all kinds of entrepreneurs, right? And so we bonded over that common passion and decided to write a book together. And I'm presuming Seth shared the journey of the book with you.
Well,
a little bit. I didn't talk about the writing part, but I did talk about kind of the history of it, and of course went through all of the important points.
Yeah. Okay, so
well,
I'll tell you something funny about working with Seth, which is I think there's some people on the call who know him, but working with Seth is like being in a small room with a tornado. That's my favorite description. He moves really, really fast. And whenever I moved quickly on something, he jumped right in to move at the same or faster pace. So we could not have done the book, I think. We couldn't have done it apart. And it was just an amazing collaboration.
Awesome. So let's do this. Let's finish up in the situation. We got 2 more slides to hit there, and then we're going to jump into a breakout into some meaningful kind of conversation. And I want to really pull in some of the other new builders on the call and really start to pull in the entire group. So we talked a little bit about this already, Elizabeth and Seth, but this was about that situation where it's over 50% of new businesses, 4 million minority-owned businesses, and 700 billion. These are some of the stats we took off of the Senate.gov. $700 billion in annual sales. Anything else to add to this slide?
I think overall, the economic power of small businesses is often overlooked because individually they're small, right? And I guess that's why they don't get written about as much, because it's, we actually we have a quote somewhere in the book about some economic development person from a city basically saying like, if I help 5 small businesses start and they each employ 5 people, that never makes the paper. But if I entice one slightly larger business in and they agree to hire 25 or 35 people, that makes front page news in my little town. And so we often discount the benefit of these small businesses, but together they comprise nearly 50% of the employment in the US and 40% of the GDP of the US. And I should be careful to note, I mean, we don't talk about like big business bad, small business good. We think about sort of the US in a certain balance. And the truth is we've gotten out of balance. And if you look, for example, at the GDP production of small businesses, it's come down over time and steadily so. And so, that's what we think is alarming. It's not that there shouldn't be big businesses. Of course, we're fans of Amazon and other businesses in certain situations and for certain things. But we're not fans of the way that sometimes those big businesses just suck all the air out of the room.
Yep. Fair. And then maybe just, this was one of the key takeaways we took away from our conversation was, what does it mean if these new builders are actually poised in a situation to be successful? And maybe instead of discussing that here, this is an opportunity for us to go into our next breakout. And so again, for those who joined a little bit late, we're going to use the power of Zoom to put you into these rooms. Please turn on your video and participate. Have a quick intro. We're giving everybody 2 minutes here. And so the idea is to really take a moment to identify where these new builders are in your cohorts, right? Or in your communities, or your businesses, and your clients, in your personal life. Maybe it's down the street, maybe it's somebody who services you. Think about that. And then are there implications for having our society, if you will, having this one primary narrative, the stereotype of an entrepreneur? I mean, we all, in the very beginning, that poll was pretty stark. All of us thought it was under, 15%, or a majority did. And really, it's just not the case. And so this is an opportunity, again, to meet somebody. So go full in, say hello, get excited. And then what we're going to do is we're going to broadcast you every about 2 minutes to switch to the next person. And then we'll pull you in, all back in, and we'll have a little discussion. So we'll see you back here in about 6 to 7 minutes. Welcome back, everybody.
Breakout sessions are hard, man. You just get going and then we're like, boom, transported back.
I want to bring it though, Seth. I want to keep it going. So one of the conversations that we started having real quick in our breakout session was around the idea of the power of words, the power of language, and the ability of a word like entrepreneur to carry this kind of lexicon of a lot of different dialogues with it that, is baggage that comes with the term. And so, I'll say, as Elizabeth put it in her response, was, I bow down to the power of words, right? And relative to Seth's saying, the conversation of taking back the word entrepreneur. So please, if you guys could just, spread some of that knowledge about what you think about the language and how we could possibly take back that word. I'd love to let the group hear that.
Well, I use it all the time, especially when I was reporting from the Middle East. I would use it to really give power to women entrepreneurs who have a very, as you imagine, a hard road in the Middle East. And I remember writing a story on my Forbes column where I said, I called these women who were selling soap. They were selling soap to keep their families alive in Syria. They found a way to export it. And I wrote, there are 50 women entrepreneurs. And they reached out to me and they said, nobody ever called us an entrepreneur before. And they said it gave them this power. So I think using it just in your common language, right, to describe people who don't fit the narrative is incredibly powerful.
And not caveating it. Like, we have this tendency in language to start caveating. We say like, oh, well, she's a great female entrepreneur. But why do we have to couch it like that? They're a great social entrepreneur. That phrase personally drives me freaking nuts. Because I feel like, why do we need to somehow describe it like you're just an entrepreneur? I love that story, Elizabeth.
I love it too. So here's a chance for those new to this opportunity, for those veterans, you're first up, a chance to come in. What did you hear from your group? What did you take away? What did you learn? What can you add? What can you question? You can either just unmute yourself and talk, or raise your hand and we can call on you.
I'll go.
Okay. Please. Silence is good. It makes somebody step up.
Okay. I found it very interesting. This is the first forum I've been in, and for years nobody really took what I did seriously. As people would say, "Oh, that isn't a real business," because I wasn't starting a tech business. So it was really cool to be with, I think it was Alex. Sorry, I forgot exactly who we were with, and hear that these micro businesses. So I launch entrepreneurs, and they're all micro businesses, and a lot of them make a lot of money, but we're yet to be recognized as what we call a real business. So it was very nice to be in a space where somebody else recognized that, and frankly, to be here and hear this conversation. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, April. Warren, go ahead, jump in.
I was in a room with Dallas, and he brought up something, so this is a shout out to him, but he brought up the concept that an entrepreneur building a business is to maybe help in the generational wealth gap that's been created, and thinking about your business today as a small business negates the value of what it could be over a long period of time. And I thought that was a thought that hadn't crossed my mind, but also a skill set that maybe I hadn't come across. How do you consider your business over a long period of time? So thanks for Dallas for that.
Thanks, Warren. Thanks, Dallas. Hey, Jerome. Jerome Williams is here. Welcome, Jerome. Thanks for being here. Did you want to jump in and share a little bit?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today. Honored to be here. And entrepreneur for me is really, as a former NBA player, professional athlete, stepping out into the entrepreneurial space was definitely dominated by, in my view, by tech. It just seemed like it wasn't anything in regards to the tech industry that, the other spaces that exist are very, it's hard to reach that capitalization and access to the financing needed to really be successful, especially for minorities. That wealth gap is something that continues to increase from from my perspective, and I just believe that just the numbers don't lie. Women are definitely in this entrepreneurial space, and just as minorities try to be as well, but they're not getting the same look as these the like I said, the tech companies.
Yeah, thanks, Jerome. I'm curious, do we have any other investors on the call? It's just scrolling through here. I know Bill's on. I'm curious from an investor point of view. I know Dan's on. Anybody? Jim's on, it looks like, so dealing with a lot of different investors. I'd love to hear their point of view and what's changed over time, and even in the kind of recent past.
I can jump in a little bit. It's Jay Hirsch from Break Trail Ventures.
Hey, Jay, thanks.
Yeah, we've definitely seen quite the uptick, but I think what's interesting, we invest in seed and A round type, pretty generalist funds. But what we've been seeing is you can't just start saying, I want to invest in more women, I want to invest in more minorities, because they have to be able to build businesses that really are fundable from a venture style deal. And so there's an infrastructure that comes there. And so it's a couple years of work. And I think that's what we're starting to see really come to fruition. Our fund is about 50% now to minorities, which is great to kind of see that matches some overall stats, but definitely not, wasn't an intentional thing. It's just, we're funding great businesses, and those are the ones we found. But what I think is really interesting is that it doesn't happen overnight, and there's an education piece to build venture scalable businesses. But that's not the only businesses that need to be that should have support and should have funding. And I think that it starts with an educational gap and then some infrastructure that allows them to everybody to build a business that has the chance to be more successful, whatever success might look like. Some that might mean venture, and many it doesn't.
I should point out, I mean, there's some new financing models. We talk about some of them in the book that I think are really promising as it relates to institutionalizing, but not venture style institutionalizing, investing in a broader set of businesses, specifically that don't require a small number of businesses to create, massive return. I mean, I think about like the first Foundry Fund, which was an unbelievably successful fund that we returned, I don't know, 6x, 7x, something like that. It was a huge, huge win. 66% of the capital went to zero. I mean, it's pretty much, that's the venture model, right? And some of these new financing ideas, alt cap is how it's referred to more generally, RBI, RBF, revenue-based investing, sort of these quasi-debt equity models that allow for investing in different types of businesses, because you're really looking for more businesses that will likely be successful, but you're not necessarily looking for one business to return the entire fund. And there's some great examples of that. CoLab Capital is doing this. Founders First Capital at both of those firms actually happen to be entirely, I think in both cases, run by people of color. So, there are some really good examples of that. I should also say, in my day job, I've kind of, in our fund of fund world at Foundry, I've shifted the entirety of my attention. I mean, when I say entirety, I mean 100%. I'm literally not taking meetings with funds that don't have diverse GPs. It's something I'm doing with one of my partners, Jacqueline Freeman. And there's a lot of really good funds out there, right? I mean, now a lot of them are a little early. And one of the things I realized is that one of the things that we need to change is that the people that back funds, there's like multi-levels here, right? The people that back funds need to have a different checklist, because we weren't making progress on it for a while until basically I stepped in as a founder of Foundry and said, hey, this is something that we're going to do, and I'm going to help us look at this differently. So we're not necessarily trying to just check the same boxes that kept the business so insular. But there are probably hundreds now of really interesting funds that are being started by people of color. And I think what's happening is not that they're all focused on only investing. In fact, most of them are not at all focused on investing in people of color. They just have networks that extend beyond the average network of the typical Silicon Valley person. And I tell my peers, when they tell me they have a pipeline problem, I basically call bullshit. So you don't have a pipeline problem. You may have a pipeline problem, but the real problem is you have a network problem. Because when you spend a little bit of time, and it doesn't take that much time, but you spend a little bit of time and effort expanding your network, all of a sudden you're going to see all sorts of interesting businesses.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've done a similar thing here, is really trying to expand that diversity of a network. Justin, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, talk's meaningless to me without anything behind it. So, one of my clients, but he just joined Forbes' billionaire list, Jack Schuler. So who's the former CEO of Abbott? He's 80, and over the next 10 years, he's investing $500 million to help undocumented students in the U.S. go to, high-level schools like Harvard and Yale for free. So why is he doing that? Because undocumented students come from, undocumented people who have the most hustle. And the hustle is what has driven this country, and the new hustle is what's going to drive the next innovation. So it's a $500 million gamble, because he knows 10 to 20 years from now, those will be the folks leading. Now, the other thing is JP and I are in Abundance 360. I'm also in strategic coaching on the board of EO Chicago. And as you rise in these entrepreneurial groups, more of the people look like me and JP, white males. And those groups will maybe 10, 20 years from now will not look as much like me and JP, but I think that's what's going to happen as time progresses here and time evolves, that it's going to be more diverse. It's not now at the highest level, but it will be in 10 to 20 years.
JP,
can Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah,
please.
Can I jump in? Because I wanted just to ask Jerome a question, because I think it would be very valuable. One of the things we met when I was doing an interview, and I was so fascinated by the world he's building, where he's helping young Black athletes understand the value of their intellectual property. And so, Jerome, I guess I would just love to hear you talk a little bit about the mindset of young Black men. I think that you're helping women too, but young men and what they need to understand as they're moving into this white male dominated world where they're trying to get capital.
Absolutely. It really starts with the system, and the system was never set up for young Black males to ultimately go beyond the success of their innate ability to perform. Meaning that as long as they were able to perform, they could start to reach a financial benefit and success level, but never be taught the business around that success or what perpetuates that success. So Alumni Pros really focuses in on the education and breaking down the system of what makes that player and their talent valuable to the institution. And then from getting that education of their IP, their intellectual property, they can then begin to see how much, that sustaining ability for them to hold that dear and to protect that, and then to have their own innate value being recognized throughout the building and the foundation of that IP. Then when they're finished playing and they no longer have that ability, they will still see value in what they represented and what they became. Now, and after speaking with, hundreds and hundreds of, of thousands of retired professional basketball players and some NFL as well, they feel as though after they step off the court, there's this lag of not understanding what they can do beyond the field and beyond the court, but also trying to figure out where their value is. And from an institutional standpoint, their value is never, truly recognized. So as Alumni Pros Global Sports, we're in the business of IP. We rate players, we give them a score, and the score doesn't stop once they finish playing. It can only increase by the other things that they wrap around being a professional athlete, such as business professional, such as marketing person, endorser, all these different other layers to the business that they can contribute to in an innate way. And that's where I really feel like the young person, the young athlete, needs to be educated on this, because it's harder for them to realize that success later on in life if they haven't nurtured and protected their IP and seen the value from the beginning. Young athletes, young African American athletes especially, are located in lower income areas where education isn't at the highest level, and that's perpetuated throughout the United States. So they're already coming in at a disadvantage to other athletes worldwide and in other races. So that education needs to be there so that the middle school student who now is being shuffled through and understood that he is the next potential great player from that individual sport, then he gets on to high school and he is already in the pipeline of an ecosystem where they're charging at the gate for ticket fees, they're charging at the gate for t-shirts, they're charging at the gate for food and beverages, and then from there this player is then heavily recruited, and the same system takes over that's even bigger than the one he just came out of. But he has been systematically conditioned to feel like this is a part of the system and this is how it works, never realizing that he is the value and he or she has the value that is related to their ability and their intellectual property. With the massive influx of social media and the massive influx of this ability to actually promote themselves socially, now there's another layer to that, and it's all digital and it's all owned by non-minorities. So again, the ecosystem keeps getting larger, and minority athletes are only being systematically used for their intellectual property to benefit shareholders and people that typically don't look like them. I said a mouthful, but sorry.
Well, that's why I really wanted Jerome to be on the call, because I really connected with his ideas from the perspective of being a woman. I think the issues are different, but part of the answer of expanding the world of entrepreneurship is helping women and people of color be aware of their innate value so that they can negotiate better and demand to be paid fairly and reach for the goals. There really is kind of a re-education process where you have to like decondition a lot of what you have felt in the world. So
Yeah.
this is a deep issue, right? It's a very deep mindset shift that needs to happen.
Elizabeth, with that, I'm going to do a little plug for the book. But you can get this book, as Seth said earlier, on May 4th. I've already ordered mine. I'm really looking forward to actually digging in and reading it. So I just wanted to put this up to make sure people knew what to look for. I think it's not just in major retailers, but it's probably in small tattered covered retailers as well, I'm guessing. So maybe your local entrepreneur has a bookstore. There
are a bunch of local bookstores, JP. If you go to this link on the newbuilders.com, we actually list a bunch of local bookstores, including Tattered Cover. And in fact, just a shout out, we're doing an event with Tattered next Friday, which should be super, super interesting. It's actually not really about the book. It's about new builders. Should be fascinating.
Well, it's a great lead in. I would love at this point to introduce one of the new builders that's on the call, Chris Awatri. And I've got to know her actually through originally Techstars when she was here in Techstars Boulder. And I'm lucky enough to be considered as an investor in her company and in her really. And so Krista, welcome. And I would love for you just to introduce yourself. I've got a couple slides here if you wanted to tell us a little bit about your companies, but maybe most importantly, just some of your story and your, as a new builder and kind of your experience.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure. I know JP, I think the second time I met you, you were like, I'm interested in you. So that was pretty cool. And so it's been great. It was actually the highlight of my entire time at Techstars Boulder 2018 was meeting JP and now being part of that. So co-founder and CEO at Dynepic and Dynepic Sports. I'll flash up just a few slides of the two businesses, but then really just want to talk about my journey because I think it really talks to the conversation here. So Dynepic, this is a venture-backed tech company. I almost don't consider myself a startup anymore. I've actually almost been around for 10 years. But what we're really working to do is to organize the extended reality space and power the future of knowledge for a better tomorrow. And so, as you guys know, extended reality is really becoming a new thing. Facebook has 20% of their workforce focused on it. Microsoft just closed $22 billion contract for their Army headset. And there's a bunch of players starting to invent and create in this space. And we want to be that central hub to deliver their content, to give a place that really democratizes this industry so that if you're a creator of an extended 3D model, you can contribute it into the ecosystem. Another person can take an AI and contribute it into the ecosystem. Another person might take those two things and put them together and deliver a new immersive training experience. And we bring them all together on a common learning management framework, as well as a common record store that allows the AI to operate properly. Our largest customers, the US Air Force, but we're quickly growing. And it's an exciting time at Dynepic. And it took me 10 years to be able to say, I feel like I'm on that rocket ship I guess, scale and growth. At the same time, when we started Dynepic, we started it as a general product design firm. So I was an inventor in a lab. It was just kind of me. I started the company with my mom. She's a 40-year educator. And I was working on how to make autonomous weight training tracking equipment. It was just coming out, field band was out, and I was beating my hand up on the tricep rope and going, someone just needs to reinvent the handle. And so I went to my kitchen and started molding up some stuff and developed what we call our spiral strength grip. It naturally locks your hand into place, so it doesn't take grip strength to hold on to it. It naturally reacts to load. We are the premium tricep rope in the market, neutral grip handle sold into CrossFit. Rogue's one of our distributors. We sell it direct to consumer. We have bike grips, wake surf lines. We've launched a dog leash called Strong Dog. And then we've got hiking poles and ski poles that are patented and in works. So this is like my family company, side business, fun. You'll see the 3D printer back there. I'm a mechanical engineer. So I run both companies side by side. Dynepic Sports is a family company, completely backed internal investment. And my goal is to never exit it or sell it, except pass it down, hopefully. And Dynepic, though, is a venture-backed company. So to be honest, it's super cool to run both of those. But I'll back up to how I got here, right? Like, I'm not your typical tech entrepreneur, and I've definitely faced a lot of the challenges. Luckily, for some reason, I was born with blinders of always wanting to be the outlier and like somehow thriving on being different. So very young, I was born outside of Portland, Oregon. My dad owned an auto body shop and my mom was a teacher. And so small business, struggling, right? You gotta make not making that much money, right? Running the local auto body business, and my mom being a teacher. So I grew up actually pretty poor. We were free lunches. I didn't have a bedroom, lived in a mobile home, but had an incredible life. But I was like, when I grow up, I want to really focus on my education so that I never have to worry about money. And with that, I really excelled. So maybe naturally gifted, but graduated as valedictorian in my high school. I ran the local internet company, and I really, I wanted to go to MIT at a very young age. I knew I wanted to invent, and I knew my dad as a mechanic didn't make a whole lot of money, and my dad's mechanical engineer. It's they're gonna make a lot more money, and the best go to MIT. So I really wanted to go to MIT, but we didn't really have the means. But then I saw that the Air Force Academy, a gentleman came to our class and was like, people jumping out of planes, and yet it was still an amazing engineering school. And I was like, that's where I'm going. And so set my sights on that and got accepted. And then I graduated top of my mechanical engineering class at the Air Force Academy and got a full ride to MIT as a Draper Fellow and a second lieutenant. So again, awesome. So I got to live my dream of going to MIT. And then when I graduated, I got to go into Space Command. So as a blue suit Air Force officer, I quickly took over and was promoted ahead of my peers, to take over as the chief engineer for all of our ultra secure communication at Force Stops. So that was super cool. In the military, if you don't usually get promoted ahead of people that outrank you. But I was able to do that. Then they were downsizing, and it was hard to get stationed with my husband, so I decided to raise my hand, and they waived my commitment. And so I joined a company. They were about a 10-year startup in the aerospace side. And I got to really work underneath them and invent underneath when it wasn't my company. But I really got to grow that company. It wasn't mine though. I've launched a lot of satellites to space. I've got boxes that have docked at the space station. I worked with SpaceX brokering their extra launch space. Those companies are worth $1 billion and I helped them get there, but it wasn't mine. So in 2012, when my husband got restationed, I wanted to open my own business and really do what my dad did, right? So I opened Dynepic, and we started as that product design firm. And we struggled to get through, but I reinvented the handle. We turned that, and I basically bought that out and made that into its own company, Dynepic Sports. And then we were also looking at, as I wanted to invent on this planet, there's all these disparate systems, and the smart world was coming online, and Bluetooth was just hitting the phones in 2012. It's like, man, I want to participate in this next wave, as Steve Case calls it. And so it's like, but how is a person going to navigate this smart world and have everything talking to each other? And how is it going to protect your data along the way? So we took on the hardest case first, which is the kids and family space, because a lot of people were focused on the IoT as applied to adults. So that really became the basis of our DX platform. We built it, launched it after Techstars 2018 as Play Portal in the kids and family space. And then the smart toy market just kind of tanked. At the same time, thank goodness, the military came in and said, hey, we saw what you built, like we need this. And I went and competed against all the bigs and was able to get that, cemented in the Air Force. And now we're really just on a rocket ship as far as growth. We're completely profitable, which a lot of people are jealous with in the tech startup space. And we're growing. And I have an amazing team, and I get to run two amazing businesses. And I will say, raising money for the tech company has always been a little challenging, because there's like women, they want to put you in this box of like women's funds, and then I get treated like a baby. And then it's like, I don't need your help like that. Like, I'm already above all these dudes that are participating in this industry. So I will say it's a little bit odd, right? Where like you come in and then you totally, it's like, I've already built a company that's worth over $1 billion in the space industry. So like, but now I have to do this again. I have to prove myself again, right? So it's been interesting being in this side. I feel like I finally got Dynepic to a place where I can talk about like our accomplishments, and I get treated like a normal entrepreneur. Yeah, I don't know. I think we've had to do a lot with a little. We've only raised like $2 million, and now we're going to go out for raise for a lot more than that. Yeah, I don't know.
No, that's perfect. I think let's pause there, because I think there's probably a great dialogue. And what I was hoping to do is before we jump into some questions, and I mean, unless Elizabeth or Seth, you have something, I was going to introduce Marcus as well here and let him introduce himself, and then kind of continue the conversation going.
Perfect.
Does that sound good? All right, great. Marcus, I'm going to go ahead and share these screens for you as well, but we can jump off whenever you want. So Marcus Anderson, I actually met him through some connections, actually right before he was going to come to the next summit that we were hosting. Unfortunately, the pandemic kind of put a kibosh on all that last year, as everybody knows. And so amazing innovator, founder, thought leader in the space. And I really appreciate you coming on and just sharing some of your journey. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful opportunity to share within this community. These type of containers are so needed in this time and space. Thank you for your words and your work, Seth, Elizabeth, Jerome, being an athlete, so much of what you said resonated with my personal journey. And Krissa, there's a hyper-realistic VR project that I'm working on that I'd love to discuss with you. So you're definitely one of my people. I appreciate the invite, JP. You all are doing great work at Black Lab Sports. I always love to discuss what I'm in the middle of doing rather than what I've done. So hopefully, as I share my story and insights, there can be something that can be gleaned and pushed forward for my share. So every day that I wake up, I really like to ask myself what type of ancestor I would like to be. And the reason why I ask this specific question is due to having a deep respect of our current times and how I can show up in a way that's efficient, respectful, and humble enough not to lead with my own ego. And right now the world is undergoing a global evolution, which is integrating developments in biology, materials, and information technologies at an accelerating pace. So therefore, the future of how humans relate to and intertwine with technology, integrated machines, culture, and the planet is being defined at this very moment. A little bit about me, I was born and raised in Long Beach, California, to two beautiful parents, where they worked together for the past 45 years, building up the family business and real estate that was inherited from my grandfather. And I grew up with two sisters, one older, one younger. Following my gold medal winning older sister's footsteps, I earned a football scholarship to UCLA, where I studied American literature and economics. And I was fortunate enough to have the talent and the drive and the support to get drafted to the Green Bay Packers. It was such an exciting and inspiring time of my life. It was a dream come true. I had really good success and went on to have a healthy and productive career, additionally playing for some great organizations like the Oakland Raiders, and a lot of people are in Denver, so played with the Denver Broncos as well. And after 4 years as a professional athlete, I wanted three things that I couldn't find where I was currently at that time. And that was broader intellectual stimulation. The second was something that Jerome actually spoke about, was my intellectual property. And thirdly was my freedom. So with deep meditation, I decided to leave the game and take the game wisdom for my time on the field and made a serious pivot. And I meditated over there, and I tried to leverage those experiences on the field and stadiums to the field of the world. And I remember clearly being fascinated by a gentleman by the name of Paul Hawkins, and his solution-based approach to global challenges, and was supremely inspired by his book, Natural Capitalism, which became literally like my playbook for my journey. And I would soon, embark on, without knowing all the details, but having a clear direction, on a journey, and I decided to travel to Europe, following my mentor, who was an aviation expert by the name of Dirk Van Berkel. I initially was scheduled to be there for 3 weeks, and I ended up exploring and extending my knowledge base throughout Europe for about 10 months. Focused on renewable technologies and aviation expert research. I had an opportunity to meet with academia, technologists, futurists, and I was inspired and uplifted by what I was learning. And I wanted to synthesize my learning through a master's program in adult learning and global change in Sweden at this university called Linköping. And while I was writing my thesis, I decided to travel throughout South America with the agenda of understanding ancient wisdoms and learning from local communities to really understand how they related to and communed with natural systems. And then from there, my curiosity kept coming back to two provocations. What are the similarities, and also what are the differences between communities and kinship? And what does an authentic symbiotic relationship with the planet truly look and feel like? And I think these questions motivated me to create the World Education Foundation. And ever since 2009, I've been on a quest, to really begin realizing my vision for being a global entrepreneur and looking at the intersectionality needed to mix business with personal and global transformation, which could deliver a true regenerative future. And, over the course of about 8 to 9 years, I traveled to 81 countries and worked about 21 of those countries. I was able to build trust with global leaders, gleaned wisdom and with local elders, empowered youth, and created livelihoods from multiple communities. And during this time, I began to recognize patterns at the nexus of ancient wisdom, modern technology, and future society. And through every year, my work continued to come closer and closer to leaning on indigenous practices in order to really understand the relationality between humans and all living systems. So with respect to the Blackfeet Nation, I double back to the question that I posed earlier, what type of ancestor do I want to be? And I think with this in mind, I approach projects and businesses to really flip Maslow's hierarchy of needs, really switching from the focus of the I, I need food, I need water, I need safety, etc., and instead create the containers and conditions which allow us to operate as the we within the ecosystem. And through our research over the years, we have understood and synthesized the connections between colonization, capitalism, and climate change, which my partner at Paris coined as the ecological triptych. And through this triptych, we identify colonization as the ego, right? And capitalism is the function that drives the ego. So if you're into like computational algorithms, then it's the reinforcement learning, right? Or which supports the ID in certain ways, where the resulting consequence is climate change. So when we look at what regeneration means, it's really about a reconciliation of the fragments that have been created from our disconnect from the planet. And so to approach the consequences of the ecological triptych, there are 3 projects I'm currently focusing on that revolve around space, regenerative land development, and personal transformation. So spawned out of my time at Singularity University, I'm building out a set of companies called Urban Matrix 1 and Space Matrix 1, which utilize satellite imagery, unique data sets, and machine learning to quantify the sustainability for global infrastructure projects, where social and environmental impact are mapped to the Sustainable Development Goals. And as a vertical integration, we are aiming to launch a small satellite constellation with a value add that make it more real time to understand climate challenges. And essentially, we'll be able to provide an MRI of the world, identifying vulnerabilities within our ecosystem. And secondly, my business partner, Ada Paris, and I are really currently formalizing ism.earth, which is a holding company that will initially stand up 5 companies that work in concert to deliver regenerative futures. The first company cultivates a global anti-disciplinary community. Second is a venture collab to spin up companies that solve real global challenges. Third is a media lab to showcase and deliver new narratives. Fourth, we are building some cutting edge proprietary IP tools to create a social ontology map, deeply understand divergent meanings of language, and how cultural stories are propagated and metabolized. And lastly is a fund that supports projects within our thesis and ecosystem. And through this aim, we really set the course for intergenerational transmission of knowledge, ceremony, practice, rituals, to really connect and enhance our communities, resulting in a human behavior change. When we start talking about entrepreneurship, it is that behavior change that we need to start reframing our relationships. So to close, I'd love to speak just briefly on the future of entrepreneurship, more as a provocation than a fortune teller. And, I really see that the future is bright, and the next generation of entrepreneurs have a whole new set of tools to utilize, disseminate, and connect ideals all over the world. I believe those tools expand far beyond just technological and machine tech, but also includes technologies in the traditional sense, that interweave indigenous wisdom, technological systems, and the living ecosystems of this planet and its inhabitants to really identify and shift the culture, the behaviors, and the language that serve as the coding material to the future we look to program. I think with the rise of crypto and decentralization, we will have a bifurcation of the human species where one group who has their hands in the soil and are deeply working with living systems of this planet, and those who place their trust and lineage in singularity type technologies that blend technology seamlessly with their own biology and ideologies. And I also see a hybrid class of AI and humans, brain-computer interfaces, that co-conspire to ensure sovereignty of being, ideas, as well as ownership. So I can envision systems being built to learn with a sovereign being from the beginning of their life, where over time the AI learns the nuances of that person to hold near and dear to what is important and what is sensitive and what can and should be shared as the individual grows and has conducive or adverse experiences towards that individual's well-being. Emotions will be able to be tracked, experiences logged, environmental data remembered, and execution on social connections to other AI. So this will start in tracking school progress and learning, even creating customized learning models. And I've been called to consult for Arizona State University in shaping the future of their digital trust side. So they're looking to shape new technology infrastructure around, digital experiences with agency kind of at the heart. And I say this, that entrepreneurs, etymological word for that is one who undertakes or manages. Of the future will be rewarded with creating collaborative groups. States like Wyoming are setting laws to really help decentralize autonomous organizations to create sovereign offerings. And those entrepreneurs who have the ability to really deeply understand people, the planet, and the reciprocation of value to solve intersectional challenges while curating these unique experiences that I think people are really looking for, I think those will be the winners in the future. So you can find me at my handles, as well as Ada and I are running the ism.earth rooms on Clubhouse every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. PST, where we have these diverse voices discussing really deep topics. We would love to have everyone here join us. I appreciate this container, JP, the people you have joined, and all of the beautiful people sharing. I just am honored to be amongst you. So thank you.
Awesome.
Amazing. Thank you. I just want to say that because there's an awful lot of deep dialogue that you went through, and I just thank you so much.
Thanks, Marcus. I'd love to open it up a little bit. We're going to break out into breakouts. But before we do, we just got to meet two amazing new builders. I don't even feel like they're new builders. I feel like they're rock stars, frankly. So thanks for being here. Jump in. I mean, the rest of the crew here, I would love to have some questions or some other dialogue. Gunther, I know I can always count on you.
I can jump in with a question. I'd love to understand some of a lot of what we think about are sort of like, what are the barriers to like amazing people like we just heard from starting businesses? And I'd like to understand some of the challenges that you all faced as you started your businesses.
I can jump in. I think for me, it's really about perception, and I think, there's also other, aspects of entrepreneurship that go involved about, who should be doing what, and I think I had to battle, even for the first 5 years after I made my pivot of just being, the ex-jock, even though that I'm traveling, all across the world and actually doing the work. People still look at you and want to talk about football, and first downs and touchdowns and all those things. And I think, that breaking down barriers, especially being an African-American male, who actually had the gall and the audacity to leave the game of the NFL, that was another barrier, to be perfectly frank. And I think, sometimes when we have this idea of terminology and language where people actually have their own kind of references and perspectives on what people should and shouldn't be doing, sometimes you don't fit in that bucket, and I think sometimes money and energy is all about buckets. Can they check off this checklist? And if they do, we'll fund it, because there's metrics around it. But I think being a visionary, you're always at the edge, right? You're always at the edge of doing something different. So it's really about finding those people that really believe in you, not necessarily just your vision, but that know you and believe in you. And sometimes money doesn't take that time and appreciation to really find out who people are. So those are some of my barriers.
I have a question for both Marcus and Krista. When you started talking about all the different various, entities that you're being a part of, right? We're starting to talk about some very broad topics when it comes to tech, right? The advancing spaces of things like virtual reality. And so now you're getting into these large ecosystems that are much less, we'll say, centric to a population. They're much more global, right? There's a lot of competitive environments all across the world now, right? And so from that standpoint, as you start to engage in these kinds of really high tech fidelity environments, what kinds of things do you start finding yourself looking at as far as metrics of performance, right? What are the expectations that possibly are that you're coming in trying to fulfill or feed into that are not necessarily the kinds of things that you're prepared for?
That's a big question. I would say that on our side, the metrics are kind of reversed. My goal as a company is to give back to everybody in my ecosystem. So if I'm helping make them money, then I win. Or if I'm helping connect them, then I win. And so actually I've been able to show on both businesses that I don't have to market, because my products are good enough that they market themselves, and then our mentality around our business and that aura we give off, and that becomes something that people want to join, and then they pay it forward and they pay it back. And it, like, I'm so blessed to be in this position right now where, like, I'm really happy with where our tech company's going, because I think not all tech companies are formed in this fashion. And I'm really excited to, like, see where this, like, collaborative ecosystem can go.
Yeah, I'd love to piggyback on that, and I think, the metrics about, what ideation and actually businesses can be comprised from. I had a really large schooling, when I actually went, to these different countries, and, when I went to the DR Congo and I'm there in the village, and I'm thinking like, oh, well, they don't have the monetary resources that the West has or Silicon Valley, but the way that they innovate and the way that they think about actually solving challenges, even with the low level resources that they have, it's actually ingenious, right? I was actually going over to Africa the first time that kind of M-Pesa and Safaricom was actually being on-ramped, and they were already using digital money, right? They were already back in 2011 sending money through an app called M-Pesa. So they had the wherewithal, they made these jumps. And really what I looked at for local entrepreneurs was soft skills, like emotional intelligence, like being able to relate to other people, being empathetic, having drive, being able to, recognize a challenge, and having the processes, where I came in was just giving them the processes on how to actually get from point A to point B. But all of the ingenuity was already embedded, in kind of their everyday lifestyle. People are geniuses all over the planet. They're not subjugated to just, one realm of the of the world.
Hey, Cody, why don't we do, my thought is let's do one more breakout. And I know we're talking about some successful entrepreneurs here, but what Seth was talking about early on is that even in the VC world, there's a lot of failure. And I'm just curious to kind of bring in that conversation a little bit. Do you want to set us up, and I'll share the screen while I set us up for this last question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say failure to me is a really personal one. Working at NASA, right, we get this banner of failure is not an option. And that's honestly one of the first things that I throw out the window when I start talking to my interns when they first come in. And the reason I say that is because, we anticipate failure. Most of what we do from a performance standpoint, right, as we've talked about these in some of our previous conversations from a consciousness perspective, but we make some of these guesses, we make some of these predictions of our future. And ultimately we're anticipating that we're going to be wrong, that we're going to learn from the incorrect guess that we've taken. In fact, I'd much rather learn from failure because I know most specifically what I've done wrong, but I've not necessarily always guaranteed if I'm successful to identify what I've done right. And so from a standpoint of trying to go through some of these problems and conversations, we see a lot of new modes of operation, a lot of new ways of thinking about a problem, right? And so instead of being solution-minded towards only success, we're prototypic minded. We're trying to learn things, gain some of that more basic research as we kind of fail and tumble and polish off some of the pieces that we don't need, remove things entirely. And it's kind of a Bruce Lee mentality of taking from things what I would like to take, keeping those things of myself that are of essence, and then slowly building and resolving that till it becomes more of our unified self vision. And so when we start then thinking about the future, right, and we start thinking about what we're doing from our next steps, what kinds of things, when we look back, are some of the consequences of this failure, right? Where do we see them developing us personally and professionally? And from a perspective of myself, I love to fail. I know that with my failure, I'm most assuredly going to be able to define that next step, or at least that next phase of myself. And so in this breakout room, again, we're hoping for you guys to spend some time sharing back and forth, give some personal stories of failure or success, but just talk about how failure has been either an impactful thing for positive flow, or how failure has, possibly been a negative at the beginning, and how you've reshaped and rechanged yourself in order to improve those environments that you're stepping into.
All right, we're going to send you guys into breakouts. Here we go. See you back here in about 6 minutes. Hopefully that was good. How were the breakouts?
Very cool.
Too short as always.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the easy part, because if I know the magic's always in the room. So if I can just get you guys together, then it always seems to work out pretty well. Why don't we do this? I'd love to hear some sharebacks to the room, what you guys have, what you learned, what you heard, what was impactful. And, Zoom etiquette here is, you can either just take yourself off mute and chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we can call on you.
Scott?
I'll say something here. One of the things I learned that I really liked came from Justin, and he just kind of said, cut the blah, blah, blah and just execute. And he helps people to simplify and execute as entrepreneurs. And I definitely appreciate that. So thank you, Justin.
Thanks, Scott. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it was Justin too who left an earlier comment that got to me, I guess, because it was a observation about the media, and I've been in the media, and about this idea of there is a very pernicious aspect of one kind of narrative, the hero narrative. We were just talking about that, because I think there are probably 100 times in my career where I've written a story about a woman who breaks the glass ceiling, and then it's like the glass ceiling magically like reforms under her feet, and there's still like 20 years later, I'm still like, oh, there's a woman breaking the glass ceiling, same narrative. And after a while, I came to see that in creating a story where she was the hero, it actually kept everyone else down. In other words, by saying, oh, this person is so fantastic and so amazing, that it was reinforcing the idea that everybody else like her was not. I just want to throw that out as kind of like, because there was some kind of deep thinking about, I think, narratives going on in the chat.
Was there any, I'm curious about the rooms because we didn't get to listen in. Was there any conversation around failure? And Chris, it sounds like you were going to jump in here.
I was, only because I think a lot of people the folks that I have had look up to me and say, oh yeah, but I can't. And it's like, no, you can, right? Like, and connecting those dots for them so that they, yeah, I've achieved a lot, but I had to start down here. So helping them, with those stair steps to figure out how to get there. And yeah, I agree that, yeah, it can look daunting if you just focus on that person that's at the top. So we got to focus on all the builders just starting out and the amazing things that they're doing too.
Chris, the one thing to leverage off of what you just said there, and that was something that we talked about in our little breakout, and I think it's interesting for folks to ponder is, Marcus, you talked about narratives, right? The notion of language being that kind of really game-changing thing that we interacted with as a species to be able to start sharing information and spreading that thought. And so we develop these storytelling cultures that eventually become writing cultures to share that information. So this story, this narrative is center to us as human beings. And so, right, when Krista and all of the conversations that we've had so far, when you share your story, right, there's all of these nuanced pieces that really talk about the early struggles and the early failures that you've moved through. And oftentimes, right, we get the zoomed out version, the last 10 years where people became hyper successful. And we see the last part of the hockey stick and we're like, man, they were destined to be great. And we never saw, right, this long stretch of story that was the shaping of all the foundational byproducts of choice that get there. I just think that's really incredible that failure, when we share it, should not be just the failures at the big end, right? But those early developmental failures as an individual, as a self, as a child, in those early environments where we're foreclosing and kind of our early feelings and emotions with the environment that we're in.
I have a question.
Sorry, go ahead, John.
This is Courtney Samuel.
Oh, Courtney, sorry, it's you.
Hi, how are you guys? I have a question for the group. While we're talking about failures and successes, does anybody, and this is a problem I'm dealing with lately, I'm having a hard time celebrating my success. Does any other entrepreneur feel that?
I do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Right.
it's hard. We're hard on
Yeah.
ourselves, and we are constantly trying to work more and more and more, and there's never enough, and we're, constantly trying to be better.
We had a long discussion a couple years ago that really stuck with me at one of the CEO summits where all of our CEOs got together. And one of our really most successful CEOs, he sold that business. It was really successful. And now he's the CEO of another business. And he said something to that effect, but the way he described it is he said he feels numb. Like there's no highs and there's no lows. He just sort of feels like he just sort of exists in this middle ground because he doesn't feel like he can get excited about anything. And his job is to not get too down about anything because he's got to lead this company. And that opened the floodgates for a long discussion amongst our CEO group of people feeling kind of like they had just their emotions clipped a little bit. I don't know if other people feel like that, they're bounded on both sides. Where just the upside, as Courtney was describing it. I just wanted to share that because it was almost universal across the 40, 50 CEOs that were sitting around the room when we were talking about it.
Yeah, so I'm 100% simplifier. All I hear is blah, 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 and simplify. So I wrote a column for Inc. magazine a couple months ago. So I've talked to thousands of the world's top entrepreneurs since starting my company 4 years ago. And as a journalist, I've interviewed, thousands of people. And so I have not met one entrepreneur at the very highest level that has not overcome at least one of the following 4 things. Most are 2 or 3. Some are all 4, but at least 1. And so the 4 things are bankruptcy, 2, depression, 3, the highest level of anxiety that you can imagine, and 4, likely and or possible traumatic experiences as a child or young adult. So what separates entrepreneurs from humans is that entrepreneurs don't use those as an excuse. They just push through them, but it has damaging side effects. And so I'm happy to post the link to that article after this, but that's entrepreneur life. That's just entrepreneur life. But like I said, a chapter in my book is Celebrate Your Successes, and then Strategic Coach was the top entrepreneurial group in the world. Been very blessed to be in that the last 2 years. Dan Sullivan co-founded that, and basically helps you with everything that we're talking about right here. Thank you.
I was just going to jump in and say, as we're scaling, I find my success in helping my employees, rise and grow. And so that's where I actually find that I'm finding my value, or my success is how many of my employees I can get to try to, be way better than me in everything. And so that's where I found my success.
Can you hear me? This is Gunther.
Yes, Gunther, come on in.
Yeah, I'm taken by your comments. I think what the invitation here is to have a broader understanding of what success means. So it's not just the attainment of financial goals or status or power. We have to look at a much more holistic view of success. If you look at the etymology of success, it's related to succession. It's one step at a time, whatever that step may be, and whatever dimension it may be. But to look at it again more holistically, to sacrifice everything on the altar of material success and social status, and to suspend in the process of doing that the capacity for emotion, for deeper feeling, for aesthetics, for compassion, all the other human traits that are really important. For again, using Maslow's hierarchy, I was mentored by Abe Maslow. He gave me my first teaching job back in 1965. So very influenced by that worldview and that model. So I just wanted to throw that perspective here to reinforce the idea that we have to look at a broader definition, a broader understanding of what we mean by success.
To answer your question, Courtney, and that was a great reflection, Gunther. Thank you for that. Courtney, for me, like even being an athlete, it was almost kind of like, the habits and rituals in which actually I embodied that got me to that place, right? That even that I got there to the NFL, I couldn't stop, right? It's not like I could say, oh, I arrived and now I can start eating a bag of potato chips and not working out and not doing the things that actually got me there. I actually had to turn that up. And I think, sometimes for me, an entrepreneurship aspect is that I looked for those challenges. I looked for the adversity. I looked for the friction. I wanted to manufacture that friction because I knew there was a problem there. And I think once I was able to identify that problem, then I could actually utilize myself as a tool to actually solve that problem. So I think, celebration, yes, we all want to celebrate, but sometimes it's not even in our ethos to actually celebrate because that's just so embodied in who we are as people, as tools that show up as entrepreneurs. And I think, to the point of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think, or just Maslow in general in that train of thought is that at certain point, it is about the I, it is about the ego and the personal ego. But then I think a lot of entrepreneurs start to realize at some point is that the ego is a myth, right? And that at some point they have to understand of how many instances and how many people and how many understandings had to go right in order for them to be there. And if it wasn't for those things, then they couldn't stand alone on an island. Right. So, when as an entrepreneur, for me, at least, I was very reluctant to kind of celebrate too early, in order to say, what, it's not about me. It's really about all those collective individuals and energy that went in to making this thing possible. I'm Marcus, I'm complete.
As I reflect a bit on this topic, I think one of the greatest myths that's been handed down was Frank Sinatra's song, "I Did It My Way."
That's my wife's favorite song, by the way. I don't know if she.
You're right about this a little bit. This sort of the myth of the lone founder, right? And we've kind of, I don't know what that's about, and I mean, we talk about a little bit about where that came from, but it's so destructive because no one ever builds business in a vacuum, right? It's always done in some form of community. And again, I think we're back to this. I think we talked about it in our breakout room a while ago, but it's this libertarian myth, and I don't really understand why so many people in Silicon Valley think of themselves as libertarian, because I think it's because they like to think that maybe somehow they're solely responsible for their success. Or something like that. But
yeah, Seth, hey Seth, this is Dan. I agree with you that the kind of the myth of the soul, like I did it all myself founder, but I also believe that without the ego of a lot of the people on those teams and whatever it is that's driving them, they sort of have to live in some kind of a weird interplay of there's a we aspect to building this thing. And there's very much a what am I doing to make this happen? And on the failure piece, I find that topic so interesting because I'm one of the people that I will be very honest and say, I hate to fail. And I know I'll learn from failure, but that doesn't mean I want anything to do with it. And I will actually find myself incredibly motivated to avoid it, and to the extent that it probably propels my successes I've had both as an athlete, as an entrepreneur, much more than my drive to be really great at something. I think that the curse of the worry about failure has been a huge motivator for me. And when I've had really bad, like I was so taken by an experience I had. I won a gold medal at a world track and field cross country championship, and then 4 or 5 days later I had to drop out of a race that I was in second place in. And for the next week, all I could think about was the race I dropped out of. I'd won a gold medal, and it wasn't even part of my, I gave myself about 10 minutes to enjoy it. And I was like, shit, that sucked. So it's just a super interesting topic.
Well, one of the things we found in the research for our book is that Americans as a whole, Americans fear failure more.
I totally believe that.
Yeah, is rising. And we didn't get a chance to dig into that question of why. And I think it would be hard, right? You'd have to probably like a lifetime of work to figure out what that's all about. But, two of our theories were that today's parents really don't let their kids fail, so you don't get a whole lot of practice at it. So it's terrifying. And then the second thing is that practically speaking, the new builders really, for them, the consequences of failure are terrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you risk $10,000 of your savings on a business and that's all of your savings, that's awful, right? And there's no social safety net. It's not like, I think it's pretty hard for people, the vast majority of people who don't have the capital, the family wealth, to even think about failing.
Makes sense.
I kind of agree with Dan, though. I mean, the fear of, like, I live in a world where, you know, as an innovator, I'm okay with failing because that's just the road to success. But the failure of the business itself, I actually had a thing where I was losing my health and I lost all my possessions to mold. But the one thing I couldn't lose was my businesses. And we dumped all of our savings into saving the businesses. And so, because it was just like, I can't completely fail. And so I think that, like, yeah, I agree with you, Dan. Like, that fear of failure drives me to work so hard every single day to make sure that that doesn't fail, even though I'm failing, you know, forward in my business.
Exactly.
Chris, were your parents or was your father supportive of you starting your own business?
Supportive in saying yes, you know. I think he knew how hard it was for him, though. Ultimately, he ended up shutting down his business. So I think he was wary for me, like, to start my business and businesses. But, you know, now he's completely supportive. But I think he was definitely wary.
Well, before anyone jumps off, I'm going to just share some contact information so that you can, again, if you need this, Emily at blacklabsports.com can get you all this information. But we'd love to, you know, hear what your thoughts are. Our idea of, actually, we're going to probably do a Clubhouse thing. Maybe, Marcus, we can do something together on Clubhouse or join your Clubhouse. I think continuing this conversation is really helpful. And this is the screen I wanted everyone else to see. If you want to get in touch with any of the speakers today, feel free to do that. You can kind of connect them, whether it's on Instagram or email or whatnot. So I just want to make sure I put that up there. If you wanted to grab a screen grab, you can do that. It will also go out in the email and the follow-up for this. So keep an eye out for that. And with that, we're kind of at time, but I'd love to kind of just hear a couple of last closing thoughts, and maybe Seth and Elizabeth, and you can kind of lead us out. I put you on the spot there, I know.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, why don't you talk about our key takeaway? Because I think that's, you know, the grit and perseverance thing. Because I always like to end on that.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, the key takeaways, I'll just quickly run down them. I mean, we discovered when we started looking into this world that entrepreneurship in America, we said it's dying. It's been on a profound decline for the past 40 years. We believe it's been overtaken in a negative way by this myth of the tech founder, not the myth, but by the narrative of the tech founder from Silicon Valley, with a lot of the stuff we talked about tonight, right? Some of the toxicity around that. We also think this celebration we have of size and scale has gone over the edge and is now toxic, right? That we should think about redefining success to include small or influential or other ways of thinking about success. We, practically speaking, since we, not that we discovered it, but we've pulled together the research, I think, in a powerful way in the book that shows that the next generation of entrepreneurs are women, Black, brown, immigrants, as they've always been, and older people. And we really need to restructure the financial system so that we can better get them capital. And then finally, our final takeaway was an optimistic one. We revisited the entrepreneur who carries a lot of the story of the book, who's a Dominican baker. And she was so optimistic, I think, that she helped us be optimistic despite some of the research really that the new builders are poised to succeed in the economy that's emerging from the pandemic. I think that, like every generation of entrepreneurs, they're going to be at the forefront of reinventing the economy.
Excellent. Well, everybody, thank you again. Thanks to all the speakers. Elizabeth, thank you. Seth, Krista, thanks for being here. Marcus, so great. Everybody who joined in, really appreciate it. We will put this up on a blog, so if you wanted to rewatch it or share with somebody, we'll do that. But again, thank you so much for taking the time and being part of the community. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. That was great. Thank you.
Wonderful night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.